Hello, and welcome to the Megan Taylor Creator Podcast, a show for entrepreneurs looking to grow their business with digital marketing. In this episode, I'll be sharing with you my top tips on how to write a marketing case study. Let's get started. In this episode of the Megan Taylor Creator Podcast, I wanted to sit and talk about how to write a case study that you would be using for marketing purposes, because I feel like marketing case studies are something that are generally misunderstood by a lot of small business owners and solopreneurs that don't necessarily have the background experience of writing content and writing content like marketing case studies. I feel like there's a misunderstanding in two ways. Firstly, I'm not sure they actually understand what the purpose of a marketing case study actually is. And secondly, I am not sure if they understand how to actually write one. And because of that, the content that they come up with actually turns into something else. So, for example, I've had clients come to me and say that they want a case study, but they've actually presented me with something like a press release, which they don't have the same purpose. Similar in some ways, but a press release is more of a journalistic piece of content that is supposed to essentially announce something, whether that be like a partnership between a brand or a new product or something like that. Whereas a case study is supposed to basically highlight customer success stories, and it is a really strong consideration and or decision stage piece of content that you can use to really build trust with your customers, because you have concrete evidence of the fact that you've been able to deliver the results that you say you can on your website. So with that in mind, today what I'll be doing is I will be breaking down how to write case studies in 3 different ways, and then I'll also just be giving you my top tips for writing case studies as a whole. And as always, this is going to be quite a long episode, so let's just get straight into it. So the first case study that I have to share with you, and I have to say this is one of my favourites, that may just be because I'm a journalism graduate, particularly music journalism. So I've had quite a lot of experience with interviewing particularly professional musicians, and I have read a lot of different interviews and I've seen them formatted in a lot of different ways. But also I've had quite a lot of experience since working in content marketing with actually handling client interviews as the main format for a case study. And I find that with client interviews, a lot of people seem to think that it's good enough just to essentially deliver the transcript of the interview itself. But I feel like that's not necessarily enough. I feel like client interviews, they work better when you essentially give a little bit of context, and I find that actually crafting a narrative around the interview rather than having the transcript be the narrative itself is really effective. So that's kind of how I would approach it. And what I mean by narrative is that you want to kind of, you want to set the scene, but not necessarily in a way that you might do for journalistic purposes where you're describing where you are and what you're saying, unless it's related to your business. You mainly want to set the scene about what it is that your client does, their business model, and also what their purpose is, what their struggle was before they came to you, and then maybe give like a bit of glimpse into transformation before asking the questions about what it was like working with you and things like that. So that would kind of be my approach. I would mainly focus on the narrative here. And the narrative doesn't have to, again, the narrative doesn't have to be the whole interview either. You can genuinely have real quotes and, format it like an interview, but you may just want to add little bits of context here and there just to help the audience gain a better understanding of your client and why it is that they came to you. And when it comes to interviews, you'll also want to not only focus on the narrative, but you also want to focus on design. A good functional design can obviously be a huge part of whether or not a prospect decides to engage with your content or not in the first place. So you want to make sure that you have things like pictures of your clients if they're happy to be shown, and kind of be the face of the customer story in this case. And obviously, you'll want to have lots of interesting graphic design elements that really bring the story together, and maybe some infographics that explain more complex concepts. So, for example, one of the clients that I worked with when I was working in an agency, they offered business loans for health and social care. And we worked on a case study for a client who had actually set up a medical center during COVID-19, like when it was really bad. And obviously, this was just before we had really gotten vaccines into the mainstream. And it was the very, very early stages of the vaccine. So the people that really needed it the most, this was essentially a vaccination center. And we were learning all about how they actually set it up and what they were doing. And we designed it in a way where it was almost like a feature in a magazine, which is what I kind of pined for. I think that we were all kind of on the same page in terms of that. And it turned out great. It took lots of iterations, I think, because the subject was quite a touchy subject for one of the ladies who I was working on the project with. But generally speaking, it turned out to be great, and it turned out to be a really lucrative case study for them. My overall thoughts on client interviews as case studies is that they can be one of the most powerful types of case studies to help prospects really understand what it's actually like working with you, just by giving your customers real insight into the buying process from the perspective of the customer itself, which means that it's not going to be biased. Whereas if you talk about your own buying journey, you'll probably know that there's going to be issues with it, but you're never going to highlight those issues in any other marketing context. So that's why customer success stories are so important. One reason why they're so important. And then that'll also help your customers understand what actually made you stand out compared to other competitors that they're probably looking at. So normally there's a reason why customers choose to work with you over your competitors. And it's really essential that during the interview you ask these questions so that you can get real life quotes as to what it was that made you stand out. And finally, they're a great way to actually cover the results and also the transformation and life post working with you and why it's been so beneficial. The next case study that I wanted to talk about today that you could use as far as formatting goes is a video case study. And obviously, with the rise in video content, it's very clear that modern day consumers, they favor video content over any other type of content for the most part. It can be a really powerful way to kind of stand out from your competitors for several reasons. When it comes to written case studies, there's always going to be more of a sense that you've written your words in a way that you still want to be perceived by your customers. In that sense, I don't think that everything that you write will be 100% unbiased, but by using video case studies and specifically focusing on UGC content, which is user generated content, that's a really, really good way to build trust with your audience, because the content will be genuine and it will come from genuine customers without any real edit and any real massaging of the truth, if you will, which a lot of brands have been called out for in terms of misleading and misusing quotes to make it look like something else. So that's why video case studies specifically created by users are so important. And the key thing here is making sure that your content is genuine. Again, another reason why UGC content is so imperative in this sense. You can do so much with this. You can get them to essentially review a product if you're a product-based business, and that serves as a testimonial. Or if you're a course creator and you've offered a course, you can get your client to essentially review the course for you as well. Both of those things, they're just good at building trust and making your content seem genuine, and that is gold. I think in this day and age, so many people, especially with influencer marketing, the lines are blurred between what customer content is real and what isn't. So content that's, got less production value, that's actually been distributed by your customer, and you kind of repost it, that's going to be more impactful than any fancy marketing case studies that you see, in my personal opinion, because you know that the brand have, again, put them in a particular light, and that always takes longer to build trust. And in some cases, it can do the opposite if they find out that you're not who you say you are and you've created a vision of your brand, whereas they can actually find out from real life what your customers have experienced when working with you. The last case study that I wanted to touch on today that you can use as a format for your marketing case studies is reports or white papers. And the reason why white papers are so effective as a case study format is because when you have data on a client that matches your ideal customer, this is just gold for building trust. And while all industries can benefit from leveraging data to boost their image, there are three types of firms that would generally benefit the most from this type of case study, and they include tech businesses, so businesses like cybersecurity firms and web development agencies, finance firms like accountants, brokerages, or credit unions, and creative agencies, so marketing agencies or web design agencies, things like that. Those people would really benefit from having a report, white paper style case study on one of their customers that is essentially the personification of their ideal clients. And I would actually recommend, if you are a B2B audience trying to focus almost exclusively on this style of case study, specifically if you're trying to target B2B audiences that are paying for a higher ticket item, because those audiences are automatically going to be more difficult to win over, because obviously it's a big purchasing decision. No matter how much money they have, there might be a lot of people who are involved in the buying process that you will never see, and there might be a lot of pressure riding on whether or not the service or product that they choose, if they choose it from you, actually works. If it doesn't, then obviously they're going to have a negative impact on your business as a whole. So when handling these types of audiences, it's really important to try and bear in mind that a lot of the people that you'll be talking to, they're going to have a lot of pressure when it comes to purchasing decisions, especially if you're attracting C-suite execs. They're the people that are running the company. They're the people that are ultimately accountable for when things do go wrong. So that's why white papers are so important, because they essentially serve as concrete evidence that these types of clients can go in whenever they're having, an important meeting with other managers trying to decide what product to implement to solve an issue, and they can actually use this case study to help them back up their logic and back up their reasoning. And obviously with white papers and reports, you do want to focus on gathering the right data, and the data that actually really highlights what you're trying to say within your case study. It's not enough just to have, a random piece of data that looks good. You want to make sure that you're using data that's actually going to mean something to your target audience, and is data that has shown that you have proven to essentially solve an issue with a similar client before that they're looking to solve. So that's really important. Be selective with your data, and also be careful with your copy as well. Careful with your copy in the sense that you want to make sure that you're presenting your data in the most aesthetically pleasing way, because again, your white papers might be presented to other top C-suite execs in the company in important meetings, and you just want to make sure that not only is it easy for them to digest the information, but they leave that meeting with a good impression of your audience, because you've taken the time to design your data in that way. So now that I've given you my favourite case study formats that you can work with when writing your case studies, I just wanted to give you a few more tips on actually writing case studies so that you can make sure that you're putting your best foot forward and writing case studies that are genuinely going to make an impact. So my first tip is to choose a client that matches your ideal customer. And the reason why I say this is because while you can write case studies on any customer, choosing a customer that matches your ideal customer would get you the most results, because automatically your content is super targeted. You essentially want to make sure that you're focusing on is the real life personification of your customer avatar. And you want to make sure that this kind of customer you've really built a strong relationship with, and you've really maintained a good performance, so that you have the data to be able to include in whatever kind of case study you're choosing to write. So that's really important to consider. And just remember that when you're building your case study, you want to be honest with what you've managed to achieve for your customer. And the reason why this is so important is because, again, a customer can find out down the line that actually you've not been able to deliver what you thought they would, and that's just going to really damage your client's perception of you as a business. So by being honest, you're essentially just building trust and setting customer expectations. And no matter how little or small it is, what it is you've been able to achieve, you can still use copy in a way to make your results sound impressive. It's just all about the context and the framing of what you're saying. So just bear that in mind. And speaking of customers, the next tip that I have for you is to actually actually think like your ideal customer. So when it comes to planning case studies, the reason why you want to be in the mindset of your ideal customer is because, firstly, when it comes to interviewing your prospects, if that's going to be part of the process, you want to be able to ask them better questions, and questions that you know your current prospects are going to be asking, and then just being able to have an actual customer ask those questions ahead of time is really competitive, and it's really going to help build trust and generally make your customers, your prospects, feel heard and like you actually understand what they're going through. And the more you can empathize with them, the more likely they are to trust you. And that's again the second reason why it's so important to be able to think like your ideal customer, is because you'll be able to actually empathize with them. And then that's again another massive part of whether or not your copy reads well and connects with them. Being able to empathize with your customer not only means being able to ask the right questions, it also actually just means being able to write copy in an engaging and insightful way. You're going to be able to craft the perfect messaging, position your company perfectly, and also adopt the right TOVs and things like that. So that's why it's so important to actually get into the customer mindset. My last tip for writing case studies to kind of wrap this episode up is to use storytelling techniques. I've spoken a lot about storytelling and the power of storytelling on this podcast before, but the reason why I love talking about this so much is because at Megan Taylor Creative, we follow the creative content marketing methodology, which is comprised of 7 key principles. And one of the key principles within that methodology is to tell stories, essentially. And that's why, say, for example, when I was talking about client interviews, that's why I was speaking about building narratives, because that's what's ultimately going to engage your audiences and build interest and get them to take action at the end of the day. It's not enough just to have a piece of content that doesn't really read in an interesting way. You need to generate some kind of interest in order for your audience to be compelled by it. So that's why telling stories is so important. And there's a lot of different storytelling frameworks that you can adopt when writing your case study. But I find that for this purpose, things like the before after bridge and problem agitate solve, those particular frameworks are really good because they focus specifically on transformation and highlighting how your customer will feel after they've worked with you. And obviously, if you can help the customer visualize what it would be like to have their issue solved with your helping, then they're more likely to want to work with you. So yeah, that was it. That was everything I have to share with you on this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it and found it valuable, and it helps you to actually write a case study that hopefully converts a lot of prospects or leads that you have. Obviously, if you do need someone to help you write a case study, please do get in touch with Megan Taylor Creative with your project requirements, and we'll get back to you with a personalized quote. If you like this episode, please like the video on YouTube and subscribe to our channel so that you can be made aware every time a new episode is released. And as always, I will speak to you next week. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.